So thanks for your patience and sorry about that. All right, so today I'm going to be giving you a little bit of an insight into what it feels to go from an instructional designer, or a learning designer, or learning experience designer to a leadership position. In my case, I'm a team lead, and how to survive in the attempt. So I'm super excited to be here today. This is one of the last sessions of the event. I cannot tell you how honored I am to be here, but let's just dive in. Let me tell you what this all is going to be about today. So the agenda is going to be more or less, I'll tell you a bit of background so that you can understand where I'm coming from, and maybe even relate a little bit to my story, if that's something that you experienced as well. And then we're going to tackle some different situations and address the challenges, the solutions, and the feelings that happened all at the same time, and how we address them. I'll give you a little bit of an insight into the results after all of the things that we've been through as a team, and then I'll open up for questions. But don't hesitate to still participate in the chat. I have you here, and I can sometimes focus on what you're saying. But if not, we'll try to pick up any questions at the end. So if you've never seen me or never heard me on any of my presentations, you might be wondering why I'm talking to you today. So let me give you a little bit of insight into that. So I'm one of those people who fell into instructional design or learning and development by accident. So I'm a self-made ID, and I made it into the corporate world through going through a series of freelance adventures. I designed quite successful trainings when I just started as a training coordinator at the previous company that I worked at. And then obviously I wouldn't call myself successful if I hadn't had a few projects that went well and the client still wanted to work with me after our first collaboration. And then I fulfilled my own dream of leading a team. I always knew that I wanted to lead a team. I didn't have it clear when and how it would happen. But here I am now telling you my story. So one dream down. And I hope with this session, I'll be able to spare you some of the mistakes that I already made or the team has already made. And we can see how those things can be avoided, how the things that should be avoided can be avoided. One more thing about me that might be important is that because I've always wanted to take on a leadership role at some point, my academic background is also in business administration and management. I also did an executive MBA while I was living in Spain. I'm based in Belgium now. Don't know if it matters. And yeah, so let me tell you a little bit more how I got into the field, right? I mentioned that I ended up in L&D by accident. And now that I have the screen on, probably a few of you have already read that it says overcoming the imposter syndrome. And I'd be interested to hear how many of you can relate to this. In the social media, I've been seeing quite a few posts from people that I would have never expected to say that they have experienced the imposter syndrome. In my case, I also had to overcome it, and I think I'm constantly trying to overcome it. I don't think it ever goes away, and I think that there's been a few talks. But do let me know in the chat if that's something that you can also relate to. Have you ever felt like you were just faking it, or maybe you felt like you're not worthy or of your position or your job title or whatever it was for you? An impersonator syndrome we've got. Transition from education to L&D, yeah, I think any transition ultimately leads to questions and doubts and self-doubts. But think of how brave you are to have done it. Yeah, it is real, Ali. Thank you. So just to give you a bit of an insight of how it happened to me, I felt the imposter syndrome the second I called myself an instructional designer. In fact, I was already doing instructional design, and then I found out that that's what it was called. And then I decided, well, okay, then I am an instructional designer. And the minute I called myself that, I was like, when I'm gonna get called out on it, right? When is everyone is gonna start seeing that maybe I lack the credentials or lack the skills? But then I never did. And I think that what happens when you have the imposter syndrome is you try way harder than when you actually feel that, yeah, you're in a good spot, you're in a good place already. And I think that really shows. So that's another way of looking at the imposter syndrome. It's something that really drives you to excel and to be who you claim to be. And so in my case, well, I called myself an instructional designer. I went freelance after not too much experience in the training field. That's something I don't always recommend doing. And before I knew it, I had clients all over the world, and nobody was asking me, why on earth was I calling myself an instructional designer? So that gave me a little bit of confidence. And one of my clients at the time was TransPerfect, and I started working with them more and more. That's the company that that I am with now. When it started, I just took a project here and there, but then the collaboration got closer and closer, and I started feeling like I was a part of the team that I was working with. In fact, it was so much so that I actually participated in their team meetings. And then things happened, and the entire department that was e-learning development department reshuffled, let's call it that. And because of that, things moved a lot and people moved a lot. And all of a sudden, there was a vacancy in the team that I was working with because the team lead had transitioned. And I suddenly saw that that could be my opportunity. So I pondered my options, and obviously I could continue freelancing and getting all the experience. But then you know already that I had a dream of becoming a team lead. So I figured, why not? And I decided to just go ahead and raise my hand. And raising my hand felt exactly like this GIF. I stepped ahead and I said, I want to do it. And then I was like, what am I doing? Is this the right moment? But then the good thing that I did, I think, and I recommend doing that if you have the chance, is I actually spoke to the former team lead of that team, and I asked her what would she think if I took her place. And she said that I'd be perfect for that role. She considered that I would be the perfect fit. So I couldn't really think about it any longer. So one of the first learnings that I want to share with you today, or takeaways that I want to share with you today, there's going to be a few, is to grab the opportunity. If you are looking to transition, the opportunity will present itself, and it's going to be up to you to actually take it. And in this case, my advice is, yes, ponder your options and do consider what are you losing, what are you gaining with the opportunity. But at the same time, I think it's super powerful if we follow our intuition. That this is not actual business advice, this is personal advice. Because in business they will say, no, follow the data. But I think that in these moments, all we can do is trust our intuition. And if it's something that you want to do, even if the universe might be telling you elsewise, well, just go ahead and do it. So, right. Let me tell you a little bit about what was the team like when I took on the role. So this was 2021, and we had two disciplines. So we had UX UI designers and instructional designers, and we were 5 people at the time, including myself. So 2 of those people that I led were UX UI designers, and the other 2 were instructional designers. We were spread across 3 different countries, and we had a lot of questions about what's going to happen. In the meantime, the environment that this was all happening in was that The department was rather new, or we could consider it new after all of the happenings. Then I personally had no direct manager as a result of that reshuffling. Then we were working remotely. This was 2021, a year where the pandemic was still quite strong. And we had no documentation about what we were doing, how we were doing things, and whatnot. Obviously, that also leads to not real processes defined. And okay, what compensated for this? Well, of course, great people, right? You got to know who you're working with. And even if you don't, you got to trust that you're working with the best people. We had all the best intentions, and that really transpired because the team really wanted to make things work, even if it was scary at times. We had tons of initiatives, and I am guilty of thinking up ideas all of the time, and I feel sometimes like I'm a fountain that people don't know how to put away. So I have ideas, and sometimes I'm very pushy in trying to implement them, but we usually have a lot of fun in doing that. And we also had lots of work to do. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the situations or the experiences that we handled from 3 different perspectives. We're going to look at the challenges, the solutions, and the feelings. Or I'm going to talk to you about how to deal with the unknown. There's a lot of that in leadership, or I think there is. So the first objective that I set to myself was to build cohesion. It was a moment where obviously the team was kind of reassembling itself, or assembling itself, depending how you look at it. So the challenges that we were facing at the time, I already mentioned some of them. We were working in an uncertain environment. We were a new team in a new department. We could consider ourselves that. And we were working remotely. Some of us never saw each other. And besides, we were based in different countries. How did we approach it at the time? So the first thing was giving the team a name. And that was my initiative, one of those crazy ideas that I have. And because I'm very humble, I called the team Design Superstars. And you know what? That was actually a very good move, because till day, we're still design superstars. Everyone who has been a design superstar is still a design superstar. And that helps us actually connect to something ambitious, something funny, something maybe even ridiculous at times. Then we also started having daily meetings as opposed to weekly meetings, which was what we had before. And my objective in those meetings was also to give the team a little bit of visibility, because it felt a little bit siloed, because we were doing our thing, right? And there was a lot going on outside, and sometimes it was better probably not to know what was going outside of the team. And so my intention here was to learn myself. Of course, I was new to the company and I was new to everything. And I wanted to understand what was going on and what of it I could relate to the team, so that they knew that I would be looking out there for them and taking care of not just the team and everyone individually, but as a team within that department, within that company. My other objective was to give the team a challenge to build cohesion, and that's when I created the storyline challenges that you can now find on my website called mindupscaler.com. The objective of those challenges was essentially, we identified that we were building e-learning for articulate storyline, mostly also Rise and other authoring tools, but with storyline we had the problem that not everybody knew how to use it. And how can you design anything for a tool that you don't know how it works? So the intent of this initiative was for everyone to get to open storyline, to work through it. It lasted for 8 full weeks. So I would create a challenge, launch it, and then the team would have an entire week to complete it. And that went really, really well. Not only we learned the basics of storyline, but we actually showed each other very funny experiments with it. And then my other objective was to give the team a voice, and that was done through the daily meetings, of course. And my objective was to construct a space where the team felt safe to share whatever was happening. Whatever they shared in the team would stay in the team as long as it had to stay in the team, and I didn't have to take any action on it, right? So creating that safe space and letting people be themselves was an important part of this whole experience. And ultimately, we decided to focus on only the things we can do now in that moment. So the feelings. The team was probably feeling a lot about whether they can trust the company after everything that had happened, whether they could trust me as a new team lead. Maybe some of them have felt some anxiety at times, but also I think there was a lot of excitement for new things, excitement to participate in change that you could drive. And on my side, I was thinking, what the hell am I doing? And I think it's important to talk about it, because every time you see posts from big leads and managers and they seem like they know what they're doing and they seem so confident, well, I don't think that they always are. And maybe it's just my experience, but I certainly wasn't certain that what I was doing was always right or the correct thing to do or right for the time. So my first lesson learned, or second in this session, is that you don't know everything, and that's fine. It's okay as long as you're transparent about it and you communicate openly that maybe you're missing some information, but you'll find out later. To me, honesty is one of my personal core values. So to me, being honest is being good, and that helps really build cohesion, build a good relationship with anyone. The next thing connected to building cohesion was building rapport. And here we had pretty much the same challenges, but added to those, of, for example, remote work, was also the different disciplines that we had in the team. So how to work together when you're a UX designer or UI designer, and when you're an ID, or how to work together when you're living in different countries, or when you come from different backgrounds. Right? So here, what we did was I set up weekly one-to-one meetings with every one of my team. Obviously, in the beginning, it was just 4 people, but I'll give you a little bit of update later on in this presentation because that escalated also quite quickly. But still, we have one-to-one meetings that last half an hour with each team member. Then we had occasional informal calls, and those could have been any of the daily meetings if we didn't have that. We had a lot to share, and we just wanted to talk about everyone's favorite drink or something like that. Whenever possible, we also tried to meet face to face, not only ourselves, but also with the rest of the people from the department, and that really helped a lot. I think there's something in having a person in 3D in front of you and even being able to touch them if they allow, and in a good way, really actually goes a long way and makes a big difference. And on my side, I also had a lot of conversations with HR teams, because having team members in different countries means that I had to learn how they operate in those countries. What are their timetables? What are their breaks? What are their regulations in general? I might have been the only person who had read the employee handbook for different countries, which I don't think my employees have read. And the feelings at the time on the team side, they wanted probably to be understood, to be heard. Some of them might have needed motivation to work in the team, and a space to be themselves, right? I think that that's super important. We talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work, and there's argument against it and for it. But I personally think that at least there has to be some space at work where you can be yourself. The professional side of you will also come. And on my side, because I was building that, I was wondering what would be the best level of connection and how deep I wanted to go. So that took me to my next realization, which is work is a combination of the person and the profession, and you can't take away either of those. So obviously you can take the person outside of work, and that's outside of work. You can meet and be friends and everything. But at work, there must be some boundaries set. You have to set a comfortable space for people to share maybe some concerns or some things, some personal things that they're going through. They have to be comfortable doing that, but at the same time, you have to limit, I think, your own investment in that, and sometimes advise to seek support elsewhere if that's necessary. But to me, it really helped, and it builds a more profound connection that you would probably think if you get a little bit personal. Then the next challenge, or the next situation that we work through is, and I guess this is no news to anyone, working through chaos is, I think, something that we operate with pretty much every day, unless you're a company that has figured it out. We had a lot of chaos, especially in the first year, right? This is my second year now, and in the first year we had a lot of chaos going on, and the second year we had other challenges that I'll speak about in a minute. So here, because we had no processes defined, we had to try and define some processes. And at the same time, we had to complete projects in time, in scope, and in budget. And we had to try and be accurate in estimating effort, but that was kind of hard if we didn't know where we're coming from. So solutions that we implemented at the time was defining how we want to work. So not just following some methodology, or not just following some set of steps, for example. We wanted to know how we feel comfortable working and what works for us. So the lack of documentation was also something that we faced at that moment. So we actually addressed some of the issues by documenting some processes. And I'm not saying that SOPs are the solution to everything, but they definitely bring a little bit of structure. And even if it's not an SOP, if you're calling it more informally a workflow or something like that, something that people can still refer to if they don't know how to act. Then we try to identify our own strengths and weaknesses to be able to see how we operate and where we're strongest, and to bring some order by categorizing our activities, understanding where we're coming from, templatizing some of our work, creating our own templates for, I don't know, storyboards or prototypes or I don't know, handover documents and things like that. We also wanted to measure what we were doing, so that's when we started tracking the time. And at the beginning, it was a pain, and then it became a necessity. And then we started tracking the time that we had tracked, to be able to estimate our efforts more accurately. So all of that was going on at the same time that we were trying to work. So sometimes the team felt that maybe they were a little bit lost in where they could start, right, before we had anything defined. Sometimes they felt pressure for accuracy and quality. And that's not only something that we would feel from the clients, for example, but a lot of times, I think in a creative team especially, you put that pressure on yourself because you want to be better, you want to develop yourself, you want to stretch yourself, and you want to grow. And you feel that you have to be creative, right? So sometimes that's also dealing with yourself and your own ambitions. And sometimes we had to wing it, and winging it means that sometimes it will go well and other times it won't. And understanding the risks of going that route is also very important. And on my side, I was trying to ponder how much pushing is too much pushing, because as I said, we were trying to work on all these things at the same time as we were working on actual projects. So on my side, how much could I push the team, or should I push the team to do more administrative tasks that we still needed done, and not break them in that attempt. So yeah, that was something that I was thinking about a lot. The result of these experience was basically realizing that our order doesn't kill creativity. In fact, it allows it to thrive. When you're working in chaos, sometimes, well, maybe some people are very good with that, but a lot of times you have to have some structure to be able to build on that, on top of it. And assessing the circumstances under which you're operating at the moment can help you understand whether you have the bandwidth and you have the power and you have the energy or the resource to actually be creative, or you don't. And when you don't, you have other tools that will support you. And those tools come from having order and structure. So next one is a big one, because one of the things that we had to do in last year, 2022, was to scale up quite quickly. I have to say that within the company, within TransPerfect, our department is a little bit like a startup. So that's why everything that I'm saying could be relatable to people that work at startups or scale-ups. And at some point, we needed to really, really scale, and it was scary and exciting at the same time. So the challenges were hiring and training new people, right? We wanted a lot more people than we had at the time, but also at the same time retaining talent. And that's not always possible, and that's not always a good idea, in the sense of let people grow, and that growth might not always happen in your team. That might not be something that you can offer. And letting go is a big part of leading a team. Then maintaining team cohesion. So we worked a lot on building it, and now we were growing very fast. And obviously we had to try and keep that cohesion while managing all the workload. There was a lot, and we didn't have a lot of visibility into the pipeline. We didn't know how much work was coming our way, and that made it a little bit more difficult. So how do we go around resolving this? Well, the first thing I did is to structure the interviews into something that I could quickly assess whether the person was a good fit or we were a good fit for that person. So the interviews quickly became quite more structured. I'm a fan of test assignments. I know that there's a lot of people that are in disagreement with using any test assignments because that's free work. In my case, obviously we don't work on any projects. All of the test assignments that we have, I have created them, I have invented them. And on top of that, I always let the candidate use whatever they produce as the result of the test assignment effort to use it in their portfolio. So that's my offer. If you like it, you go through it. If you don't, then not. Then we had to ensure smooth handovers, and that's kind of related to the fact that people not always stay in the team, and the team changes all the time. And when someone leaves or transitions to different roles, you have to make sure that, first of all, the offboarding is as pleasant as could have been the onboarding, if it was. And if it wasn't, then it should, at least the offboarding should be pleasant. And then obviously trying to document everything that you have done and the tacit knowledge that you were able to build on your project to make sure that whoever takes over from you, oh, thanks, Jonathan, and good luck. Whoever takes over from you needs to be equipped with the information that they need. Then another thing we had to do quickly was grow the team's accountability, and that meant assigning additional tasks that maybe they weren't used to performing and making them accountable for it. That was as much a solution as it was a challenge, but it worked really well because the team started getting a little bit more visibility into everything that I was doing on the back end. And they were able to not only help me, but help me optimize those processes. So that was really good. Obviously, support was offered not only from my side, but also from the team side, and we could reach out to other teams in the department whenever we needed it. We also reduced the number of meetings that we had, because at that time it was not sustainable to meet every day. We reduced the number of meetings to just 2 per week. And as I hinted before, we started working a lot closer with the teams that we were working with, right? It was the e-learning production doesn't stop at design. So we had to work with development, with project managers, with solutions architects and whatnot. And all of that while everybody was scaling up. So open communication was really, really important. And the feelings. So the team might have felt that they need more help than the average, and sometimes they might have felt that they have too much work to do. Maybe they wondered whether their job is at risk if they saw some of their colleagues leaving. Maybe if they were new in the team, they wondered how they could fit in, and that's one of the biggest concerns of a newcomer. And some of them wondered what their responsibilities were because they started growing. And on my side, I needed to understand how to keep cool and stay positive in this environment where there's just so much going on. And we have a question from Kate, whether I had taken any courses or read any books that helped become a good leader. Thank you for assuming that I'm a good leader. And you'd love to ask whether you had a role model that helped you in your journey. So thank you for the questions, Kate. I have not read any books except, just learn from the experience that I had in my master's and my executive MBA. It was largely focused more on the business side more than the people side, and that's something that I think the program lacked. So one of the things I did was take the people management optional subject, and then I read a lot of, not books, but really articles. So everything you see at HBR that's being shared around LinkedIn and everything that just called my attention. And all of a sudden, a lot of them start to look very similar. And that's when you say, okay, I've got this, so I can progress to another thing and another topic and explore other ways of doing things. I'm just by nature, but very curious. So that's something that's always interested me. So I don't know if I can recommend anything enough in this space of how to become a good leader. And role model wise, yeah, that's a really interesting one. Oh yeah, I do have a role model, and that's the manager that I had at the real estate company that I left to become freelance. She is incredible, out of this world. She was the best manager I've ever had, and I don't think I'll ever grow to become a person half of what she was to me. And she was not just a manager, she was a mentor, and she was always calm. She always felt like she knew what to do at any moment, even though I think she sometimes might have felt the same way that I do sometimes now. All right, so yeah, how to keep calm and stay positive, right? That was my question. And let me just give you a little bit of insight into what the team looked like in 2022 or at the end of 2022. We've gone through ups and downs. We still had the two disciplines, right? UX, UI, and instructional design. But now we were 10 people. So it was me plus 9. And we had 3 UX, UI designers and 6 instructional designers. We were now spread across 6 or 7 countries, depending on which part of the year you look. And we still had a lot of questions. That didn't change. So to anyone who is experiencing something similar, the best advice that I can give on the topic of facing something that you've never done before is try to have a strategy. Try to think of what you're doing and why you're doing it, most importantly. And sometimes that strategy is going to be a little bit blurry because you're not going to have visibility into what your top management or higher management is thinking. Try to get a little bit of insight into that. A little bit of visibility really helps and goes a long way. But ultimately, your responsibility lies with your people. At least that's the motto that I have, and that's the way I try to lead. And any decision you make ultimately will impact your people in one way or another. And that might mean team morale, it might mean motivation, it might mean mental health, it might mean so many different things to many different people. And so as long as you've done the first building blocks of building rapport, building cohesion, you should be okay. But when you're scaling up, that goes out of your control a little bit because there's so many new people that you still have to get to know. But as long as you remember that you are dealing with people, I think that can guide your decisions a little bit better. And sometimes it's also about having difficult conversations about, hey guys, we need to brace ourselves, and we need to really buckle up because there's a lot coming, right? But always have also your sight on the positives. If that's a what's the word? If that's going to end, you're just going to have the end in mind, right? So if you've got to work a little bit harder, it's like a sprint, right? When you work out or something like that. So the next thing that I want to talk about is precisely mental health. That is not only a challenge, but something that is top of mind for me. And the things that we had to struggle with were time management, workload management, and sometimes even burnout. And that is not an easy topic to talk about. So what can you do to tackle some of these challenges? Well, some of the things that really help is identifying the need for support early on. That's not easy. And normally the best way to do it is to train your team or to coach your team to be able to identify it themselves, because you're not always going to be everywhere. And in fact, I hope you're not. Then you've got to have proactive communication. That means that if you identify that you're struggling with something, it's best that you share it as early on as possible so we can look for resolutions in that moment. Then if you just let it grow on you, right, until you cannot handle it anymore. Then we also try to have a policy of open communication. That's something that I talked about in the beginning, right, when I said that to me it was important that people felt comfortable sharing their personal stuff or personal feelings or emotions. And obviously sometimes what really helps is just taking the time off. So the team was at times feeling that they have to be productive all the time, which is not true, that they want to help others while they maybe need help themselves. They should challenge themselves. Again, we're talking about creative people, and I think that this is something that we can relate to. And sometimes it was just plain can't do this anymore. And on my side, unfortunately, it coincided that I felt like I needed the support as much as my team did. So that was a very, very challenging time for, I think, everyone. And the lesson learned here is that it can really happen to anyone, and there's nothing shameful about it. Although I felt like as a team lead, I had no right to experience any burnout. And a lot of leaders say that if you read any articles about burnout. But if you've never experienced it, and I hope you never do, you just don't realize how bad it hits you. And what in my case, I knew that I couldn't handle it myself, so I sought support elsewhere. And that's what enabled me then to identify when my team might need that too. So in my case, I used the experience of having gone through burnout to be able to help my team identify early signs that they might need support. And on top of that, I mentioned open communication, and I decided, in my usual fashion, to be vulnerable and to open up to my team about it. So when I came back from 2-week leave, I actually just said, hey guys, this is what I'm going through. I'm going to need some of your support. So I'm going to get through this, but I'm going to need your help. And surprisingly to me, that was the best thing I could have done, because and some people actually told me that in their past jobs, nobody had openly discussed it as much as it. I think that it's a topic that just needs attention. So yeah, I don't know if you would be able to take my advice. It's very personal, but that's what I did in that situation. And finally, we are talking about helping a creative team thrive, right? So how do you stay creative when all of the rest is going on? So some challenges are that some projects just aren't motivating enough. Some clients are, well, let's say, hard to deal with. And sometimes there's just too much work, no time for play, and I don't think that's good. So in our case, we make room for humor pretty much every day, and for that we have thousands of chats that are just informal, and we share gifs and photos and whatnot. We also, because we are a diverse team, I mentioned that we now have about 6 countries that we are based in, but that doesn't mean that we, on top of that, we come from different backgrounds and from different cultures. And then we share a lot in the team. I'm one of the biggest sharers. Every time I read an article or I see, I don't know, Mike Taylor post something on Twitter that I find interesting, I share it with the team. And we try to get creative with things that aren't design necessarily. And that's something that I think we can enjoy, because that's a safe space to fail, essentially. For example, all of our internal initiatives, they don't have that much pressure for success as a client's project. And there you can be very creative, even if it's an Excel sheet. So feelings at times can be that you're not very motivated to continue working on a project because you cannot find the right angle for it, or you might feel that you're intimidated by, I don't know, a client or sometimes even a colleague who's having a bad day, or maybe you just want a new challenge and what you're doing is not enough for you. And sometimes you might ask yourself whether you can be unproductive at work, and these are conversations we've had in the team. So in my case, I was thinking, how can we spice it up a little bit? How can we integrate more play at work so that we could have those breaks that we need in order for our brains to have the bandwidth for creativity? So my last lesson learned was that productivity does not equal performance, and you have to allow yourself breaks. In fact, I think you have to make room for breaks, not just allow yourself. And sometimes those breaks need to be larger than, I don't know, 5 minutes for coffee or 10 minutes to eat in front of your computer. That's not a break. You have to actually maybe go out if the weather is nice. You have to maybe go for a ride if you fancy, or if you live close to nature, well, that's even better. Because sometimes that's the only thing that will get you back on the creative, in a creative mood, right? I think that everybody who is creative or feels creative can relate to experience also the block that you can feel sometimes upon opening a blank slide or a blank page. And sometimes to overcome that block, you have to just stop staring at that blank page and go out. So what are the results of this? And this is my proud moment. The Superstars team celebrate each completed project. We celebrate each other. We embrace diversity because we've built a team that's just diverse by nature. We learn from each other. We face a lot of uncomfortable. We support each other, and we challenge not just our colleagues, but also our clients to make the best experiences that we can for the learners that we are addressing. So I know that I'm a little bit over time, and I would like to take any questions if there are any, but if you don't have them or you don't get to share them in the chat right now, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to this session. You can connect with me on LinkedIn anytime. I invite you to also check my website, mindupscaler.com. It's home to my blog, and it's home to the storyline challenges that I mentioned in the beginning. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that session. I think when Jonathan left, he kind of made the perfect comment, really. But this is gold, really, really great stuff, and important stuff for anyone leading a team, whether you're new to it or whether you've been doing it for years. I think you addressed a lot of the questions along the way, especially around like having a role model. And I mean, if anyone's got any more questions, now's the time. Drop them in the chat. They're absolutely fine to cover them off. But if not, there's a little bit of a gap now until our very last end of day keynote for this conference. It's at 7:45 GMT, which is in about 40 minutes time. It's Kara North. She'll be talking about upskilling L&D assessment and evaluation. We'll just give it a moment. It's an exciting way to finish out the conference.
It is.
just give it a moment to see if any questions do come in. Lots of comments. Thank you so much. Enlightening session. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad
Yeah.
you enjoyed it. I until the very last moment, I was actually doubting that this was going to be of value, but then I thought I would have found it important to learn from someone who has experienced things like this in the past. So I'm glad to have shared my experience with you.
Well, no, thank you very much. I think it kind of goes in the opposite direction of what a lot of a leadership and management training does. We tend to hear a lot about here's the Eisenhower box method, or here's the competency curve, all these other things we get trained as managers and leaders. When actually this
Yeah.
is the stuff which often far more directly impacts performance actually over time. So no, thank you so much. I think we're good for questions, but you've got all the details. Get in touch with Olga if you do have questions in the future. Do check out her website. It's got loads of fantastic stuff on it. But until the very final session of this year's conference, thank you once again, and we shall see you shortly.
Great. Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in once again. It's good to see some familiar faces.